Welcome to episode 4 of the Inspired Conversations with Coaches podcast. I'm your host, Scott Campbell, and this is where I share interviews with heart-centered coaches to inspire you to unlock your true self so that you can have a truly wonderful life. Today, we're talking about the conquering the fear of failure. My guest is Natalie Taylor. Natalie is an executive and leadership coach, cultivating brilliant managers, and brilliant leaders. It's a great episode. Enjoy. Hi, so welcome, Natalie.
Hi, Scott. Lovely to be here.
Yeah, welcome to the Inspired Conversations with Coaches podcast. Really good to have you on. Done the intro already, so we're going to get straight into the conversation.
Yeah.
This one particularly, we're talking about conquering the fear of failure. So,
Yes.
which is, I think it's going to be really a bit like some of our podcast or topics, but I think this one's going to be really be poignant for a lot of people because I think that is a big. There's still a massive sort of thing around that about the fear of failure.
Yeah.
But I want to kick off really. So why do you think that the fear of failure is such a common experience for so many people?
Yeah. That's a great question. And I think really it comes down to a lot of experiences that people have throughout their life and their growing up, their childhood. And additionally, I'm seeing it more common in our sort of younger generation where they have access to social media 24/7 and see a lot of high achievers. And I genuinely see a lot more resonance with I need to do better, I need to do more. And I think that comes through really strongly in the kind of next generation. So I think really a lot of people have grown up with, wanting to achieve, wanting to do more, wanting to do better,
Yeah.
and lots of childhood experiences around that, but now more prevalent because of access to social media, I think.
Mhm.
That's my take,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, because you had to be quite strong-minded, don't you, to kind of know that what you're seeing on social is not reality. It's
Absolutely.
easy saying that, but you have to be quite strong-minded, don't you, to say that? And
Yeah, definitely. There's an element of having that kind of strong mindset to know that it's not always reality.
yeah,
And if you're growing up in a household of high achievers as well, alongside seeing stuff on social media that also portrays that high achiever, you're, in my experience, more likely to want to strive for more and strive for better.
yeah,
And I think that can be a big part of what forms this idea of failing. And if I don't be a high achiever, or I'm not doing X, or I'm not doing Y, um, that I'm failing and I'm
mm,
not as good as everybody else. There's a competitive nature, I think, that comes into play.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there is. And I suppose is that. I mean, the obvious one would be, with siblings, if you like, and you've got a brother, sister that's going. But is that also? I mean, you do a lot of, we talked about being about executive and leadership coaching.
Yeah.
Is that true in the workplace as well, with other people, kind of seeing other people achieving high and
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the work that I do with leadership teams and executives, they're surrounded every day
mm,
with individuals that are high achievers, are ambitious, and want to get on. So actually in workplaces and in the coachees that I work with, it's definitely more prevalent. And again, linking that to access to social media and
childhood stuff?
yeah, the childhood elements, because typically the people I work with are in senior positions. They've worked really hard. They've got great credentials, um, and they still want to achieve more. So it definitely is more prevalent, I think, in the workplace, in the types of coaches that I work with.
Yeah. Okay. And what was the for you? What was the because what listeners might not, or people watching and listening, is that I put a list of topics for people to say, yeah, I'll get to. What was the pull for when you saw this topic come up? That you think, oh, well, I want to be on a podcast about that. What was the personal kind of, if you like,
Yeah.
relationship for you with it, with that conquering? Was it the conquering the fear of failure?
Yeah, so it's something that's a personal affliction or has been a personal affliction of mine in my early career.
Yeah,
When I trained to become a coach and you explore some of the tools and the methodologies and how to unlock people's beliefs, for example, that was the first one that I thought, oh, wow, that's me. I have an innate fear of failure, or did have
yeah,
an innate fear of failure. So it resonated really personally with me. And I've spent quite a number of years, 10, 15 years, really working through that personally. And, the first thing I would like to say is I think you can overcome it, and I think you can suppress the emotions around it and also do things differently. I think it's in their background. There's always still that strive to want to achieve and
yeah,
do well, but I definitely believe for me it's a personal affliction that I've had, and I've definitely overcome it and and been able to suppress and reframe it actually as something that's positive as opposed to a negative affliction.
yeah, yeah. I think that's important. I thought there would be a personal connection there for you while to come out.
Yeah.
I was myself because the I had about I think it was before it's a couple of years before the lockdown, if you like, about a year and a half before lockdown. And it's just things a year that I had quite a serious illness, and then my daughter had a serious illness. So the it was a bit of a funny year for me, and I've kind of come out of it. Um, one where I then had to kind of chase the money and do things. I kind of wasn't being me, if you like, because I was able to, so I need money now, and I need to recover and blah blah blah. And I got
Yeah.
into a place where I felt really lost.
Mm.
And it's interesting you said that because for me then a lot of negative things, but the a big thing for me then I went through this mentorship program. Actually, we've got a mentor and a coach, and part of it was it was a real breakthrough for me was talking about previous successes. We did a whole
Mm.
thing on, like, and we had to fit in this I think it's a Dan Priestley thing, cap something, I can't remember what it is. It's an exercise Dan Priestley goes through the
Yeah.
person of influence book, and the and it just about it highlighted stuff you'd done, successes you had in the past and done well. And it was for me, the eye opener was I've forgotten about all that stuff, and I've actually
Yeah.
been, you know, really successful. And that's some big successes, and I think and I still to this day a little bit try to, like, when I'm journaling and meditating stuff, is like focus on, well, there has, because it's always going to bite you in the bum with something, isn't it, I suppose. And I always, now I immediately go to, oh, right, actually, I have had success. I have got over this
Yep.
before. Blah, 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 blah. And so it's interesting that your first thought is that negative, isn't it? That when
Yeah.
you get in a slump, if you like. So I suppose the real thing is, I wanted to ask you on this, is like that I think people that really relate to this, and particularly the title, will pull them in. How can how can someone actually recognize in themselves that their fear of failure and it's holding them back from
Mm.
pursuing their goals and taking, not necessarily taking risks. I don't want to sort of connect it to taking risks. I don't think it
Yeah.
should be. Definitely pursuing your and ambitious goals, because most people goals are not ambitious
Mm.
enough. I
Yeah.
would say on the whole. So, and that is probably where fear of failure can break into a little bit. So, how can someone recognize that in themselves, that this fear of failure is holding them back?
Yeah. I think a good starting point is to acknowledge language that you use in day-to-day conversations.
That self-talk to yourself as well.
Self-talk, yes. So, what am I telling myself in this scenario? And language such as I can't, it won't, it's that negative connotation in the language that stops us moving forward and
Mm,
being able to reflect upon those words. What is it I'm telling myself about this scenario or this situation? I think is a really helpful first step. So,
mm,
am I using those types of words and those types of phrases? I can't, I won't, it's not helpful. Those types of phrases
yeah.
really come into play quite frequently with a lot of the clients that I work with and have done for myself as well. That's a yeah, a really great first step.
Is that easy for people to catch themselves saying that? Or is it so? Because when someone says,
Mm,
um, and I've witnessed, but when someone says like, "Oh, you're a negative person" or something like that to someone, it's always surprised at that. When I see that the person that said it is like, really, am I? It's like, and it's kind of obvious to everyone else, right? And but for themselves, there's a little bit. So is it easy to catch yourself sort of saying them things, or do you feel is it just kind of
yeah.
natural people don't? Is that a little bit of how do they increase their awareness a little bit then to catch themselves, I suppose is
Yeah, there is, you do need a level of awareness or self-awareness to catch yourself in those moments. But a technique that really helps or can really help is to reflect and journal. I think you mentioned you do journaling as
yeah,
well. So, take a moment after conversations that may be about achieving those goals to reflect on what you have said and
yeah,
write them down and
yeah,
say, okay, how did I approach that conversation? What was in my mind and what did I say?
mm,
Um, and therefore, that becomes a good practice to help it happen unconsciously, I think, for future.
yeah, yeah. I think so. One thing that's worked with one of my clients recently. Funny, it wasn't particularly about VFA, but it's just about the mindset and more positive for his staff. Um, and it had in one that kind of reviewing with his staff, it was like, well, what went wrong this week? And I just sort of said, well, let's change that about. So like, what could be better? How
Yeah.
could we improve this rather than talking about what go wrong, that negative. But even that he said had a massive difference in terms of his own self,
Yeah.
like, and also the responses that he was getting. Because it was a much more positive conversation. It was starting rather than a negative conversation on what went wrong. And
Yes. Yeah. And just that gentle reframe and a switch of language can make such a big difference. And yeah, reflection is a really helpful tool, I think, to become more aware and self-aware of that type of language that you might
yeah,
use.
yeah. Would you recommend to people asking for feedback from people close to them? Sort of with that.
Yeah, another great tool or technique, have conversations with team members if you're in a work environment, family as well, really helpful to get feedback from, to say, what are the types of things I consistently say that might stop me achieving my goals? And what do you notice about the language I use, for example, um, to help build that awareness as well.
Yeah,
Some of the leaders that I work with have techniques that they use within firms and organizations, 360 feedback, for example, and tools. So, yeah, another brilliant way, gather
mm.
some insight and feedback as well.
It's amazing when the 360 feedback went from my corporate days that people and I've done this myself. Where you go straight to the negative things rather than.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember one of my first ones I had this like with a mentor, and I was kind of, "What?" And he said, you like you focus on two negatives, but there's so many positives there. And
Yes, that's so true. That's
yeah,
so true. Yeah, there has to be a balance, I think. And, when we're talking about a fear of failure, typically, in my experience, what my clients come with or show up with is that negative connotation that they're putting onto something. So they're more likely to look for the negative.
so when we're talking about conquering this fear of failure, then so how important is the mindset then with it, and particularly if I can push you down one road a little bit on because mindset can mean there's a million things really, but particularly from what you've just the conversation we're having at the moment about that resilient mindset, then um,
Yeah.
yeah. So how can so how important is that, and how important, and what I suppose, how can someone cultivate a resilient mindset within that? Is it?
Yeah. And I think, again, from my experience and my knowledge and talking to clients, and what I've also experienced, I think mindset's the key here with regards to overcoming the fear of failure. And there's a few techniques that I use with my clients. I also use with myself if I need to. And the first point is about the limiting belief. So, what
Mm,
am I believing about myself, this situation, or this scenario that really tells you that you're going to fail?
mm,
Um, and being able to sort of address those limiting beliefs, where have they come from, for example? Um, it's a learned behavior. A fear of failure is learned. If you think about when we're born, we're only born with two fears.
mm,
Fear of falling, I think, is one.
mhm,
Um, and I have to remember which the second is. I've just
mhm.
thought, no, fear of loud noises, that's it. So fear of
Right.
failure and fear of loud noises are the only two things we're born with.
Right.
So the fear of failure is learned.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do with clients as a coach is to unlearn the
Yeah.
fear and getting underneath, well, exploring what's the limiting belief? What do I believe about myself
Yeah.
that makes me fear failure?
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. Yeah. Yeah. It'll open up a can of worms, I suppose. That's the,
It can.
I suppose what we are good at is repressing stuff, isn't it, in our mind, and then not
Yeah,
realizing that it's having that effect on things.
yeah,
Um, and yeah, that's really so. I suppose so. A little bit, I suppose, is the because there's a few things in there is the ones where these like so people's perspective on how they look at something might change as well when they and I suppose have a crossover how they look at other stuff at the but is that something where when you're working with clients, particularly your or and yourself when you went through it, is that changing your perspective on stuff, is it?
yes, yeah. Perspectives is another really great way of being able to build your awareness about how something might turn out to be positive as opposed to negative. And there's a great technique of being able to ask people to stand in a different position to look at it from another person's view.
Yeah,
So finding, for example, somebody that you um, believe in, that you trust, and say, if you were that person, how would you perceive this situation and this scenario? And what would that individual say to you
yeah,
right now? Is another great way of being able to identify what
yeah,
is it that I believe about myself, and therefore why am I fearing failure?
yeah,
Um, so yeah, perspectives. Another tool which works really well is understanding what is the worst that could happen for somebody. I think it was something that was devised by, I have to remember the guy's name. I think it's Tim Ferriss.
yeah. He's one of
It's
yeah. I think I
yes,
don't think he divided. I think he adapted it from something else. It come from somewhere else first.
yeah, may have been inspired by
Yeah,
that method of really
yeah,
sort of defining, well, what is the fear, but
mm,
what might be the consequence of that, so that it could seem less daunting if they proceed and go through it. And typically, how that's helped clients that I've had previously is that they tend to find that the worst case scenario is rarely as bad as they imagined it would be.
well, I can tell you
Um,
about the I send out what I call an accountability email to all my clients on a Friday.
yeah,
It's only three questions in it, although one of the questions has three parts to it. But one of the parts of it is around it's about creating one is awareness that you're not just like self accountability because you can go to accountability groups and I have my thoughts about it. We won't go into that on this podcast because but the but it's really about your self accountability is more important for me. And one of the things that I ask is that, like what you've done and what you didn't get done, for example, what you did done. And what's the word? And literally that question's on there. What's the worst thing to happen if you'd
yeah,
done it? Right. So, because it might be like emailing someone or making an offer, out of someone. And it's like, what's the worst thing? It's literally 99. In the way, it's literally 999 out of 1,000 that the answers are nothing.
yeah, yeah,
And it's just to make them realize actually, yeah, nothing, nothing bad. No one's gonna, I always say if your actions are not gonna, put someone in risk, potentially kill someone or potentially harm
yeah,
someone, then
yes. I used to have a phrase in the last role that I was working in is that, I worked in HR for 24 years, and I used to talk to my team all the time about no one will die. No one will die. We're in HR. We aren't brain surgeons.
yeah,
And that's a phrase I use with them all the time. What is the worst that could happen?
Mm.
And 9 times out of 10, as you mentioned, it's
No,
never as bad
no,
as they think it's going to be.
no.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
we're both. It's I suppose that's a little bit of I suppose fear of failure could be good. Is from what we've been leading to, with what it said around that really attached to what that outcome is. When reality is, we can, again, mental really enforce that into me. And it's always been being not attached to the outcome, just do the do the action, and the outcome will
yeah,
be. Um, and yeah, I suppose that attachment to an outcome is that where people are already thinking of the worst that could happen rather than
yeah,
not being attached to
typically.
it.
Yes. And typically it's a personal attachment to an outcome. It's because of something that may happen to me is the fear, as opposed to may happen to others, if that makes sense, Scott.
Yeah.
And I think what's helpful as a coach is really sort of getting underneath the what is it that might happen to you um, from a negative perspective, but additionally, well, what's the positive intention
Mm.
that that's bringing for you? And a
Yeah.
good example would be, a client that's applying for the next level role. It's a CEO position, and the fear is actually, I don't want to apply for the job. I won't ever get it. Those types of phrases and language,
Mm. I'm
and
not
really
good
help.
enough for it, and
I'm not good enough.
not trained enough. Yeah.
Absolutely, I'm not trained enough.
Yeah.
And as a coach, finding out, well, what's the reason behind that and what's the positive intention with that? And actually, where you get to is I'm protecting myself from
Right.
not getting the
Yeah.
job. So it's a self-preservation mechanism,
Mm.
is how I would describe it, and getting underneath that to say, okay, yes, it's a negative outcome, but what is it that it's doing for you?
Yeah.
And in that scenario, it's protection.
And that's so I suppose that's a really good thing where people can sort of kind of connect to because if they've got a fear of failure, that's probably happened to them at some point. It's
Yeah,
and that's the ultimate fear of failure, isn't it? Because they don't, it might get turned down for the job, so they're not going to apply for it and make up
yeah,
all of these excuses and reasons why,
yeah,
which are all from a negative point of view, as you say. And that's
yeah.
really, yeah, that's insightful.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's that belief that, if I don't move forward or don't take a step forward, that
yeah.
actually there's a positive intention in that, and
Mm.
it's self-preservation, protection, however you want to word it. And typically, I think the clients that I've experienced with a fear of failure, that really stems down to the root of it, really.
Mm. Interesting. And with the I mean, I actually come away from saying about the what was I going to say? I was going to say taking risk, whatever, actually. But how how does that play a part in and again, not risk in terms of life or death,
Yeah.
like put your mortgage money on a number on number of men or something like that. But how important is that taking risk in terms of building confidence then to conquer your fear of failure? Or is that connected to it? Is it?
Yeah, I do see a direct correlation where if somebody would is in a mindset of having a go, taking a risk, doing something different, to your point, maybe not life or death,
Mm.
um, that's there is a clear correlation in building confidence and self-esteem. I think the crux of the challenge is how you deal with the failure if it doesn't work out how you expect. So I definitely see in the clients that I've coached, there's that link between self-belief and confidence, risk-taking, are less likely to have a fear of failure, and are more likely to have a go, take a
Yeah.
step forward, do something different or out of comfort zone. Definitely.
Mm. And is there a mindset that they can put themselves into that will harness that over time? Because I can imagine someone if they've got fear of failure, taking a risk is probably the worst. So, just take a risk is probably the worst because it's 9 times 10 we might fail, but it's the learning you take from it and you're
Yeah.
And and I can take a, 9 times out of 10, I suppose it can be conceived as a failure, whatever, but I'll take the positive and run with that, if you like. And
Yeah.
that's not easy if you already have a fear of failure and trying to conquer it, which obviously I'm conscious, which that the title in itself of this podcast will attract people that have maybe got a fear of failure, rather than people that haven't.
Yeah.
So is there a mechanism, yeah, or mindset for dealing with
Yeah.
that little bit of, taking risk and not getting what they necessarily.
Yeah. I think for me, the first step is, what does risk look like for you? And defining that, because risk for you, Scott, could be you're quite happy to jump out of an aeroplane, right?
Not.
No. And I certainly am not either. So it's getting clear, well, what is the risk?
Mm,
And how do I therefore then feel about the risk that I'm going to take?
yeah, that's powerful.
And additionally, what's the one small step you can take towards the goal? So
Mm,
rather than thinking risk needs to be a big thing, it's an elephant in the room, actually, could you see the risk as the mouse in the corner?
mm,
And what could that one small step do to move you towards the goal? And I think that's a really powerful way of reframing. If we think of risk,
yeah,
it can ignite an initial, oh my gosh, risk sounds big. It sounds huge.
yeah. Again, there's a
But
lot, I suppose there's a lot to do with your childhood, your conditioning,
yep,
how risk averse that you, and what I think, I think what you so powerful, you said what I think was risky might not be to someone else, and what,
yeah,
and that is all dependent on, again, on what stems
so
from
many
childhood and your
facets.
conditioning.
Yeah,
Even
absolutely.
even I suppose what politics our parents were into will change that risk averseness and stuff like that, I suppose, and what
Definitely.
jobs they had, I suppose, and
There are so many elements that play a part in how we feel about taking risk and therefore how we perceive failure as well on the back of that. And actually, just defining what is risk for you could be really powerful, you know, to then say that what's that one tiny step I could take towards whatever the goal is.
yeah. So can you give me an example of that with the if we keep, we won't take you too far out your comfort zone, right? So if you think of the clients that you work with, then we've got executive and leadership coaches and stuff, and the organizations, then the what would be like if they want to change the culture of a business, for example? I should imagine would that come up quite common?
Yes,
So what would be sort of kind of like small risks that they can take that would, if we assume that the leadership have got a big fear of failure.
yep, yep. I think I'm just thinking about an example of a client. I won't go into too much detail, obviously, but um, who is new into a senior executive role and is looking to change the culture. And it's a very stable organization, very stable workforce, and is in the mode of, I need to make change, but I'm fearful. I am fearful of making a change. So, working together with them about, well, what might be the small step towards the big goal? So we
Yeah.
define the big goal to say it needs to be culture change. Well, we know culture takes years to adapt and evolve, but what's the tiny step you can take
Mm,
to move forward? And it could be very much just about communicating more. And actually, I'm not comfortable with communicating. I may say something wrong, for
yeah.
example. It's okay, but what does that mean? The positive intent is you're trying to demonstrate your credibility, your experience, and what needs to happen. And the small step is send a global email to
Mm,
all the employees to tell them who you are. that's one sort of scenario that, I've helped somebody work through just that tiny step of
Yeah.
telling everybody um, and doing it consistently. That's the other tactic as
Mm.
well. So it's okay as a one-off, but you need to
Yeah.
be consistent in applying it to make it feel more comfortable.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So, because yeah, 'cause the more you do it, they'll see it. They'll just brush it. If it's just one, they'll just brush it off, and it would have no impact, I suppose. And
Yeah.
yeah, I suppose again, going back to my management corporate days, is the I didn't have that much time to change a culture thing around because I was a business turnaround specialist. So a lot of times I didn't have time,
Yeah.
unfortunately. Um, but one of the things I know was a big change for me. The thing was what you said about communication was I picked up this thing about 1 minute management. So just having
Ah, yes.
just walking around and having that brief conversations with people and just and just asking just asking just send questions and but that 1 minute management of just spending a minute with someone and walking away. And I was really surprised again how my fear of failure around at the time was I haven't got time to do this, really in the big scheme of things. But I was really surprised after like how quickly it did allow change because then when I was doing like the weekly briefings or the monthly briefings,
Mm,
it wasn't the only time they were seeing me, right? So it made a big
yeah.
change of that being part of the group, if you like, and being seen, I suppose, was the biggest one from that. Um,
Yes. Yeah.
and I must admit, my biggest fear of failure at the time was essentially you say about little goals because it was just such a little thing, but I still had this big fear of failure around the time it was going to take and whatever like that.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
quite quickly saw just the things, it just may it's interesting, like just one little quick thing from it initially was that I really saw like almost within the first couple of days of doing it was I become approachable to them.
Yeah.
Whereas before it was like big boss, not approachable, don't talk to them, go into that, just see them coming and walk away.
Yes. Yeah.
They're actually become very approachable to them and they were, were approaching me and saying, and it wasn't always about, work. It was just like, oh, and it's a big change in that sense, that culture change, just from that very small
Mm,
communication sort of style, if you like.
absolutely. And I think it's a really important point that you raise of just reinforcing that one small step to move you further forward can have a really big impact.
Yeah,
Um, and consistency is the key, right,
yeah,
Scott, in that scenario? So, the one-off 1 minute conversation with John in the corridor
yeah,
goes so far. But
mm,
if you consistently are talking
yeah,
to for 1 minute every single person, that's where the biggest change can happen.
yeah,
And once you've done that small step, what's
mm,
the next small step that
yeah,
you can take?
yeah.
Um,
I think that's really good. I think that'd be really valuable to people that are watching this that have got that because I suppose with anything in personal development, it feels like it's a big thing to it's like change my mindset. So it is, and a lot of these
mm,
things are big things, but I just love your approach around them small steps because for someone trying to conquer their fear of failure, that are aware of it, that they've got it, trying to knowing that they can go, actually, it's okay to just take a small step,
yeah, yeah.
and then there's a much more chance, I suppose, then there's successes, and so that will breed confidence, and confidence is almost like the compound effect of confidence building, I suppose.
Yes, exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. And I think when I'm coaching clients and the goal at the beginning when they're talking, it might feel like a huge goal to
yeah,
achieve in a period. And my approach is always about, well, what's the first best next step on the journey and using that small steps to take you to greater things along the way. And particularly with the topic of fear, if it's an innate fear of failure and you've learned it throughout your childhood, your working life, it's not something that you can suddenly, in my experience, switch
yeah, just like
off.
that. Yeah,
It
yeah,
doesn't happen. But what it takes is practice, small steps, keep going, and continuous, consistent behavior and action
mm,
to feel more comfortable, more confident, more
Yeah,
proactive, I suppose, if that's what your goal is.
yeah.
Um,
So I
and
suppose a little bit from what you're saying is that the consistency is absolutely key. And I use that phrase a lot, from a marketing perspective as well. But that commitment to that consistency is like,
yeah.
um, I'm going to commit to initially 7 days of journaling. I know when I first started journaling, I don't know the same for you, but I struggled first of all, like want to
Yeah.
write in and just well of thoughts and like, just and writing what I thought I should be writing. I think is what initially, but I think the breakthrough for that was when the it's the commitment to consistency. Whatever, I'm going to do it for 30 days and just see
Yeah.
what happens. And after 30 days, I didn't want to not stop because
Yes.
but if I hadn't had that willpower, that commitment to that consistency, I would have lasted 30 days. I would have lasted a couple of days and
Yes.
they would have done
Yeah.
anything. So
Yeah.
it's if you do you feel in that sense when there is a period of time that and I get it's going to be different for everyone, an individual circumstance, and what the level of their fear of failure. But if someone says watching it, got the fear of failure, it do feel like there's a length of time before it starts. If you do all these little things that you've talked about, which has been some great advice so far, so powerful, some of it. The Is there a level of time where you think, right, if you do that, then commit to it for whether it's 7 days, 14 days, whatever, like what sort of time span do you think people could start feel like actually I'm getting a break, I'm starting to get a breakthrough?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Scott. And yeah, I suppose you are right in it's different for different people. I can talk about my own experience, and it took me some time to move forward through the fear of failure. But what really helped me first and foremost is knowing that was what it was that was stopping me first and
Yeah.
foremost. Two,
And if
knowing where
you
it
catch
comes
it, just
from.
be aware from it. Yeah.
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 And
Yeah.
being able to say,
Yeah.
that's what it is.
Yeah.
I'm afraid to fail because of
Mhm.
this belief or that belief about myself and what that might mean for me.
Mhm.
So protection was the thing for me. I was trying to protect my own feelings. Once I acknowledged that and I was aware of it, I was then able to put plans and strategies in place to do those small steps and say, okay, to feel better about X and, moving past this fear of failure, I need to fail fast, for example. So give it a try, sit and journal and put these strategies and plans. And for me, that meant it was, it's still work in progress. Like I say, I don't think it's a fix. I don't think you can fix it, but I know how to quickly
You've got the
deal
tools
with it.
that, yeah, yeah. I
Yes.
think that's everything with personal development. It doesn't fix it forever.
No.
But you just know that you can catch it and have the tools to deal with it, I suppose. So,
Yeah, deal with it. And, that's probably another part that works well for my clients is to say, we're not here to fix, it's what are the strategies to help you if it's
mm,
manage it, move through it, or be aware of it even could be
mm.
just as helpful as a strategy. So yeah, without answering your question specifically, I
No,
think it does take
yeah,
some time, commitment, as you mentioned, and consistency, and some strategies just to help you through.
yeah, yeah. And I think that we talked about a little bit of awareness and all that. So, was there some clues for you? What was the big thing? What was the kind of for you personally? What was the thing where
Yeah,
you really associated to fear of failure for you? Was
yeah. I remember in my early days in my career, having a conversation about moving into HR. I'd never worked in HR, and I had a conversation. I had a really great manager who was a huge advocate, a great mentor, and she's like, "You should move into HR." And I was, nope, I can't do it. I'm not good at it. It's not for me. I don't know anything about it. And I was consistently. And then I started to learn more about actually the limiting beliefs. So, what is it I believe about myself? I remember reading an article, I think, about it, and it just really resonated the way the article was written about identifying that what my belief was about myself is, well, actually, I wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
I wasn't good enough. So, therefore, what I was trying to do is to say, oh, I'm not good enough. And if I go for this job, and I don't get it, then
It will
I'm going
confirm
that
that you
it's
are not good enough.
confirming it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So that was a, part of the light bulb
Mm.
moment. And throughout my career, when I did it and I went for it, and we all experience things
Mm.
that have gone wrong and it hasn't worked out for us. And there were lots of moments like that throughout my career. But what really helped me is to sit on the what did I learn about it and how has it helped me? And I think that was been the really, really
That in itself, just
helpful.
I think it's to a question to yourself is such a powerful mindset. I think it's very underrated toward a kind of you can ask yourself a question
Yeah,
um that makes you think because it could make you think differently, wouldn't it? A question will make you think differently. But rather than waiting for someone to maybe ask you, if you can ask yourself that question, like how can it come differently? How, what is to learn from it? And they said this
yeah,
can make you aware of a lot of stuff, can't it, that you're getting resistant
absolutely.
to.
Yeah, and if you can work through it and process it quickly as well, it's amazing how much you can move on quickly.
Mm,
And I think that was the thing that I struggled with in the beginning, in my own experience, is moving through it quick, and rather than sitting in it, sitting in the what I felt like for me was mud at the time. I failed, therefore I'm not going to try anything again, sit in it,
mm,
procrastinate, lots of actions and behavior happen out the back of it.
mm,
But what I learned by just asking myself those questions, what did I learn and how has it helped me, um,
mm,
makes me move things through really quickly.
mm. Yeah. It says you know, you see this come up in a little bit of I mean, then there was like racing car, it like drivers for me is the one, and people like horse riders, so like, they fall off a horse and hurt themselves, quite badly. But there's that phrase about just get back on the horse, and it's amazing that people that you know they do that. Even people that was we see stories, that like people have had shark attacks, and stuff like
Yeah.
that. Then they back
Yeah.
out, I've been nowhere near water, usually my initial thought. But that is really like the ultimate sort of non-fear of failure, isn't it? Even though they've got
Mm.
massive ex experience of what could go wrong badly, yeah, it
Yeah.
doesn't stop them pursuing that passion, pursuing that thing. So
Yeah.
it's a
Yes,
little
that's
does a little bit come out with you with the clients around really understanding what they're passionate about and use that as a driving force?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the goals, really. So, what is it they want to achieve through coaching? And,
Mm,
it could be a plethora of goals, um, but also what drives them, to your point, what drives them to want to achieve that, and linking it to what is it that's really important to you about achieving those goals.
yeah,
Um, and that's really the crux of, in my line of coaching, of getting underneath. So if the problem is I have a fear of failure, it's getting underneath well, what drives you to want to achieve, and therefore, if that's the blocker and the barrier, how do we overcome that? If
yeah,
that makes sense.
yeah, it does, yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're saying that with people's goals then that they have, so people set goals, um, but not taking into account like what is my threshold to fear of failure, etc., like that. Is there a lot around then around that you come across that people's goals are either unrealistic or then they're not thought through enough in terms of because there is a big
Yeah.
I think particularly in the coaching industry as well there is a big thing that I think is misguided around um like your big set, big goals, big super goals. And there is a bit about, I mean, I'm saying this with a bit of um inconsistency in my own life, if you like, because a big breakthrough for me was setting bigger goals, just thinking bigger.
Yep, yep.
Right. So when someone says I have a real big goal, I kind of don't have an adverse because it was The Big Leap was a book that I kind of refer to as a big game
Oh,
changer for
yes,
me
yeah.
in terms
Hmm.
of the moving the ceiling height, if you like, and breaking through that ceiling. So I'm saying that, but then I'm also saying at the same time that if you've there's a lot of work that I did before I got to that point that allowed that
Mm,
to be a breakthrough. If I read The Big Leap and
yep.
been coached through it 5 years previously,
Hmm.
I I don't think I would have finished that book. I don't think I would have even,
Yeah.
so there is a lot of work that led up to that moment.
Hmm.
So with people with their goals, is how many of them are misplaced, or do you find that with that contributes to the fear of failure? And
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's almost to the point that you mentioned that I don't know if it's misplaced as a term I would use. It's probably more they're not as ambitious as they could be.
Mm.
So they're played down is in my experience because if you have a fear of failure, you're less likely to set really stretching target
Yeah,
goals to achieve. Um, Now, that's not to say the goals aren't right for that individual. I think what's really helpful in the type of coaching I do is to consider that that goal is the goal. What
mm,
would an extra 10%, what would an extra 20, 30, 40, 50% look like? So that people can see and perceive
mm,
that is stretch is available and a
mm.
stretch goal is available and it is achievable as well. I think typically the clients that I work with, particularly if they are suffering with that fear of failure, they undermine the level of the goal,
Yeah,
really.
yeah. And I've heard it come back to a little bit of what you said, Peter, then about then reversing and going one step at a time and
Yes.
small steps. Yeah.
Yeah, small steps to get there. Um, but yeah, how do you help them get to an extra 50%
Yeah.
and if it's achievable?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so with the how does how does fear of failure manifest emotionally and psychology, and psychologically with people, and sort of
Hmm.
I suppose from a feeling state than what we've talked about and how they can manage them feelings is
Yeah, and again, from the experiences I've had with my clients and also from myself, I think it really comes out as a low self-esteem, if that makes sense.
yeah.
So, um, never feeling good enough or never being able to feel like I'm achieving
Mm.
anything. So it typically manifests itself then in low self-belief, low self-esteem, and is directly linked to, in my experience, an ambition of perfection or perfectionism.
Okay. Yeah.
So typically, what my clients have experienced and demonstrated is, okay, fear of failure. I don't want to fail because it might mean X, Y, Z, but it's because I need it to be perfect as
Yeah.
well. So that's definitely true for myself. I have a high level of perfectionism,
Right.
and I can definitely resonate with the fact that that protection of looking after myself is because if I can't achieve perfect, it's not good enough.
You can accept 7 out of 10 and yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
then it does manifest into I can't, I won't, and I set low goals, so I
Yeah.
know I'm going to be able to achieve them.
It's really
And
interesting because someone's got that real, perfectionism. I wouldn't associate the fact the fear of failure to that. So that's really,
mm,
really interesting.
yeah, it's with gosh, I'm just thinking about lots of clients that I've worked with that, where we've uncovered that fear of failure. And honestly, in 99% of those cases, they would describe themselves as perfectionists.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
really insightful.
Yeah. And like I say, definitely true for myself. And
Yeah,
again, that practice of what did I learn? What did I take from it? Have there been one
yeah,
step forward, one tiny step, whatever the step looked like? Um, and getting comfortable with 80%.
yeah.
Um, I've not fully cracked that yet, Scott, but
On the road. Well,
but
that's really interesting because a lot of people they won't will misdiagnose, if you like, that well it is, and that
yeah,
so it could be working on a lot of other stuff, and the reason why it's not because I think that happens in the personal development as well, where you work on some things and it doesn't trigger, but there's a match up somewhere where oh once you sorted that out, that bit was easy and etc. I
yeah,
think like meditating, I mean the pre just released the episode 2 was about meditating, but the big thing for me about meditating was allowing thoughts to come in and out. Whereas when I first started, I was trying to control the thoughts, and block out all the thoughts,
yep,
and so there's always a matchup, isn't there, of something that allows that to excel. Um, so it's interesting that's really insightful
mm,
what you said about that because I I imagine there'd be a lot of people listening who go, wow, they got that perfectionism they need, they want.
mm,
Don't
yeah,
associate that because I can't accept 7 out of 10, then I protect myself from it, and
yes, and it then becomes the
because I see it as a
circle.
failure rather than
Yes, yeah.
wow, yeah,
Definitely. And I think it's I suppose fear of failure is how I would describe it, is like a spider's web. So, if it's in the middle, you're the spider in the middle of the web, and it could come down to the beliefs, the experiences, the exposure that you've had throughout your childhood, your career, but also what drives you as well. So if your driver is perfectionism,
mm,
as it is for me, and I have that appetite to be perfect,
yeah,
I don't want to fail at all. So yeah,
okay, yeah,
you're kind of trying to pull on what are the things that really get to the root
yeah,
of the fear.
it's really interesting. Um, and so with that, then is there common patterns or triggers then that intensify that fear of failure?
Yes, typically new experiences, something I haven't experienced before. And that's
Yeah,
what I see from my clients. So if I haven't done it before, I've no data to tell
we've
me
got
how
nothing
to
to
do it.
reference it to. Yeah,
No idea.
um,
So that is a very common pattern or theme that comes through from my clients, that I don't know how, and
yeah,
therefore I haven't done it before. I've no reference point to tell me whether it failed or didn't fail beforehand.
yeah,
And typically then it's the challenge of walking it through, of having a go, taking a small step towards
yeah. I suppose like
whatever that.
kids riding a bike, isn't it? It's that,
Yes,
to get them to ride the bike is a painful experience, but then once they're gone, they're gone. And, it's like,
yeah,
but there is that because they've not done anything like that before. Like riding a bike is a new experience than what they've had.
yes,
Um,
yeah, definitely.
yeah,
And then couple that with, so for example, in some clients, additionally, the low self-esteem can also then exacerbate it even further.
mm,
So yeah, that pattern of negative self-talk can also be something that comes through from clients of, I'm not good enough, it won't work, I can't. Um, I think it can, yeah, definitely. Those two things are probably very common and familiar conversations that I've had with clients. The part of that negative self-talk, it's that old saying, isn't it, really? If we believe we can, we will.
yeah,
But if we believe we can't, we don't even try.
mm, yeah, yeah. I always say that if you tell yourself all day long you're going to get hit by a bus on the way home, you're going to do everything you can to get hit by a bus on the way
Yeah,
home, aren't you? But
absolutely.
so it's interesting. So when people got them, they might come to you, for example, where they're they've kind of understood, feel they've got this fear of failure that's not getting them that role or that change in the work, environment and they want to change it in and develop their leadership, the team, or whatever it is in that
Mm.
sense, but very work related. Will they? Is a big then understanding that actually there's a lot of other not things that are not related to that that are connected to that. So it might be your relationships, for example, if you've had a series of poor relationships with people and or you've got a poor relationship with money because of background, whatever it is, does that really affect it? And people don't really
It could be, historically. I mean, as a coach, I don't dive too far into the past. I tend to coach at what I call the waterline.
yeah,
And there may be relationships historically that have influenced how I might feel about failure.
yeah,
A great example is if you have been in an environment, a home environment, and your parent loses a job,
yeah,
which then impacts on their ability to pay the mortgage, and you've experienced the fact that you've had to move home because of that. That could definitely have an influence on your
yeah.
perspective of
You
failure in
wouldn't take
some
the risk of going to a
relationships.
new job maybe because of
Yeah,
for you, yeah,
absolutely. So there is an influencing factor on relationships
yeah,
and what you've observed during your childhood, your working life. Again, if you've experienced a boss that has influenced your mindset about not trying anything new because they may have a fear of failure. Again,
they don't allow you to try stuff because of their own, yeah,
their own perspective and their own view. But on the flip side, if you have worked in an environment that your boss is, oh, just have a go. What's
yeah,
the worst that could happen? You're more likely to embrace
mm,
the learning. And even better if the boss is there saying, what did you learn from that?
yeah.
Um, yeah, and you've had
So,
that positive
mm,
impact.
yeah, that's really good. So with that in mind, so is there is there room for someone sort of like they've let's just say their awareness now, they've got their fear of failure, they're aware of it, but they've got well they might not realize if they've got particularly if they've got team members underneath or they manage people, they probably don't realize how that's affecting them.
Mm,
Um, is there is there a bit of advice in around then like actually if you be more happy, not happy go lucky, but if you be more risk averse to you allow your team members to be, they
yeah.
will also help yourself in terms of because you'll start seeing results from them that you wouldn't expect, wouldn't you? And suppose and
Yeah, I think that's
mm,
definitely great. I think you gave an example of that earlier in the conversation that just reframing how you position, I don't know, tasks or accountabilities with your team, or how to even approach tasks and accountability
yeah,
can also have that positive impact.
mm,
So rather than, I don't think we should do this because we might fail, or I'm not sure people do say that, but
I imagine it's yeah, I imagine it's said quite a bit.
well,
Yeah,
maybe. Um, but yeah, repositioning it with your team to see what they gain from it can
yeah,
be really fulfilling. Um, and yeah, can help minimize maybe some of the fear in ourselves
yeah,
of failing. It's
yeah,
if you see somebody fail, um, and they learn from it really quickly and they have a positive outcome from it and they
yeah,
feel they've had a positive outcome, it's like setting a fire, isn't it?
yeah,
You light the fire in someone else and you see it burn and it suddenly spreads.
yeah, yeah. And because I think that's where you see people where we associate people to being inspirational, if you like, as well.
Mm,
Because they've done something against the norm, if you like, that's not the norm, and it's inspiring because of
yeah,
that would really, that would, I can't even think of doing that, but I've seen that person do it. So actually, there's a sort of inspiring element to it.
yes,
Um,
absolutely.
one of the things we covered so much and so much golden stuff in this, but we can unpack this afterwards. Probably one where people, I mean, you can listen to this podcast, this conversation, I think, 3 or 4 times and pick out something different that really connects with you. But one thing, I'm aware kind of the audience a little bit,
Mm,
and the talks about with coaches, but for entrepreneurs, I suppose, and a lot, and myself included, not kind of feel myself as an entrepreneur, but a lot of people coaches are entrepreneurs as well because they run their own business, and they'll be, I say, like small business owners and stuff like that. They're very entrepreneurial that are watching this, and creatives as well, which I think is a different dynamic for people.
Yeah,
Who the there's a lot of, they often face, particularly if you're running your own business, there's high stakes, right?
yeah,
So what advice would you give someone that's kind of that in that space? Then there is high stakes often, like, do I invest in that money knowing that I haven't got money coming in yet, blah blah blah. And they also aware that they are prone to fear of failure a little bit because that's what's the titles
yeah.
attracted them to this is this. Is there a device that we give that particular set that you would?
Yeah, definitely. I would absolutely recommend get a comfort blanket from someone. So
Mm,
test it with someone because that can reinforce the positive outcome of what you're trying to achieve or tell you where you might need to do something different.
mm,
And do it outside of the circle of people you would usually do. So, Scott, I don't know if you do this, but I got into a habit of just asking my partner and just saying to my, oh, could you just test this or could you just try this? What do you think of this? Got one lens, one view,
yeah,
um, and actually retesting it with an audience that was outside of my usual
yeah,
group of people was way more helpful.
yeah. Different, like we talked about, different perspectives is just
Yeah,
hugely powerful.
definitely,
Yeah,
definitely. And of course, as an entrepreneur or a creative, you're running your own organization, so everything feels high stakes, right?
mhm,
Go back to what's the small step or the
yeah,
small stake, if you like, that might help you overcome the barrier. Um,
yeah.
so break it down into chunks.
I think that's where, I mean, we take for granted. I've had coach and mentors for a long time now, but we take them for granted a little bit. The when we're used to having coaches and mentors ourselves and all, but if you haven't, or you haven't had a lot of coaches or mentorship in the past, or and it's a little bit of sometimes there's a lot of group programs now which seem,
Yeah,
we joined it because of the community aspect, but there's a little bit of comfort blanket in that because you're in a community of people that are like-minded, which is
yeah.
in a lot of ways good things.
Hmm.
It sometimes as well could be very limiting because you're the power of the five people you're around, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
you've got that limit. So having a coach to yourself or mentor that you can go to and
Hmm.
without, because for me, when I'm mentoring people, and coaching people, is that, and I assume you're saying just by the conversation we've had, is that there's there's no judgment there. There's that taking out that lack of judgment, and that
Yeah,
really fuels that conversation to that person being to be able to
absolutely.
express themselves a little bit. So finding a coach that hasn't got a fear of failure themselves, I suppose, and but just having
Yeah.
that someone you can know that you can, or a mentor might be the better bet where you can then voice like that, and with knowing that there's no judgment, there's only kind of love, couple of love coming back.
Yes.
Same time, it's going to push you to thinking, well, have you thought about this? Have you considered
Yes.
that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really key to have, your pockets of support that's relevant for whatever you need. And that might be overcoming your fear of failure and having a different perspective, somebody with a helicopter view versus in it with you. For example, in my case, my partner, is incredibly powerful because you can just ask one question with lack of judgment, no knowledge, no lens on it that goes, yeah, I hadn't thought of that. Hadn't thought of that. So, yeah, broaden your network, go outside of your usual go-to crowd, and take a small step
There's
versus a
normally the
big one.
most, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, there's probably a lot of stories, a lot of examples around the corporate world, if you like, where people, it's not even their job, if you like, come up with something because it's simple and they go, "Oh, that's simple, that's amazing." I think the just come to mind is the Colgate one. I don't know if you know about this with Colgate. It would be
The toothpaste.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
the
So where
tube.
they had a big marketing team, about that. How can we increase sales by 10%? And it was
That's
someone that
right.
wasn't in the marketing team that just said, "Well, why don't we make the whole 10% bigger?"
Yeah.
So, it's like, and that's why anyone looking at their toothpaste now, that's why if you're under 20, you probably don't realize this, but the toothpaste used to be very thin and it's just
That's right.
squeeze it out. Um,
I love
and
that
that,
story. I say that story all the time
yeah,
to people as
and it
well.
was someone that wasn't in marketing or in the, it was just someone who's sitting in the room that said it as an off the cuff moment. And they said, like, what did you say? And so,
Mm,
yeah, that perspective is really, I suppose, powerful. Getting them surround yourself, I suppose, with them people, isn't it? I suppose.
yes. And it doesn't have to be an elaborate solution or anything too complex. It can be just as easy as what you've just described. Simple solution, um, and something that you may not have even considered yourself.
Mm. How would you? So, interesting thing. How would you react if someone, um, let's just say, kind of knows you but doesn't know you well? Not you're not friends, but they kind of know you're in a, say, like you're in the same coaching program or something like that, right? You're in the circle somewhere, and they reach out to you and say, look, I've seen this amazing podcast you were on, and this and the I just want to ask your perspective around this. So, just without answering that, how would you, and what would be your kind of reaction if someone actually out of the blue messaged you and said, and asked you a question about a perspective about something? Would you be, what would you be? Oh, yeah, and reply, or would you be kind of a bit closed-minded to that? Huh?
Oh no, absolutely, Scott. I have learn to love my hesitation
Yeah,
and fear of failure.
yeah. Love your
To
hesitation.
say
Yeah,
yes, love
yeah,
my hesitation. So I am, one thing I really enjoy and really value about the role that I play is to provide a different perspective, ask great questions to help people consider and think
yeah.
about whatever the situational
Well,
scenario is.
that's kind of
And
go where I was going to lead in with that, because your reaction itself is the smart would be is the, and I'm the same, where is it's don't be afraid, I suppose. Then you shouldn't be afraid of just asking someone within their network
yeah,
if if they're watching this and they've really got a fear of failure. It's like, but there's someone they look up to, or they think, oh, they've got a perception of, actually, that person hasn't got that issue. I'm really inspired by that person, and then maybe just maybe reach out and ask them the question and stuff like that. Because
yeah,
if they don't
absolutely.
reply back or whatever, then it's again not attached to the outcome. It's fine. That's more
No,
their own issues. But
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think we come to a natural end. It's really, it's again could pursue off into loads of things. But there's so many aha moments, actually, Natalie. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Oh, thanks,
Um,
Scott. I've really enjoyed
yeah.
it. I've really
Like you
enjoyed
said, I'm,
talking
gonna- I'm
to
going
you.
to let the audience know now. You said you was nervous about this beforehand, but you've given us so wonderful insights, and even from like the fear of failure that is learned and to boost and stuff like that is yeah. So if everyone, I think that there'd be a lot of stuff you watch this and it's really connected with you, really feel like one, obviously reach out to Natalie. We're going to put your details in the your website and the details in wherever they're watching or listening to this. Um, but also, maybe so a while it'll probably watch it back, and if there's anything specific on all that, you can bring up, because I think there were so many really good little powerful aha moments in there.
Oh, good.
So I really appreciate you being as generous as you have been with your things. I've probably led you down a path a little bit, but yeah,
No, Scott, it's an absolute
really
pleasure.
genuinely.
Yeah, it
Thank you.
really is. Yeah, really delighted to share my own experiences and really happy to connect with anyone who wishes to connect.
Yeah.
And yeah, this has been a out of my comfort zone. So, I'm practicing, I think I mentioned at the beginning, practicing what I preach and
Yeah. And
taking a
as
small
Andy
step.
was saying, you got that positive reference. If someone says, "Oh, we want you to come on a podcast thing," you can, yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So you got that, yeah, brilliant. It's
Yeah.
been fantastic. Thank you very much, Andy. I really appreciate coming on and sharing what you have. Brilliant.
Yeah. No problem. Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it.